Hi, folks. Welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about Matt Nuclear, Ben Shapiro's favorite Shabbos guy and the Daily Wire's newest hire, who appears to be speedrunning his transformation into the internet's favorite lolcow. Now, if you'll remember, in the last episode covering Matt, he got upset because I made a video joking about his new Daily Wire show. In response, Matt posted a dishonestly clipped and deceptively framed tweet where he called me a Groyper and attempted to portray me as some kind of foreigner with triple allegiances or triple citizenships. The purpose of all of this was so he could run defense for Miriam Edelson, which, in my opinion, is some of the most cucked behavior imaginable. Any American who is out here defending foreign influence and foreign money in American elections should be ashamed of themselves. But as you're going to see later in this video, Matt may have many reasons for doing that beyond simply collecting a paycheck from Israel Firster Ben Shapiro. Now, I'll save that discussion for the end of the video because, trust me, it's all relevant. Now, ever since then, Matt has largely stopped talking about me and instead shifted his attention toward Groypers and Nick Fuentes' audience. He seems to have become completely obsessed by that section of the internet. And before we get into that, there's some important context you need to know. This past weekend, Matt and I participated in another Jubilee debate alongside several other folks. I don't want to spoil too much of what happened because you'll be seeing that debate released very soon, but I do want to show you something Matt posted afterward. Matt wrote mere hours after our Jubilee debate on X saying, I just filmed for Jubilee and there was a weird Groyper guy that was Taiwanese, I kid you not, and he got annihilated by everyone. Groypers are just LARPers. Now, the person Matt is referring to here is my friend Philip. Philip was wearing a Pepe shirt, and apparently that's all it took for Matt to conclude that Philip was a Groyper. Now, obviously, there isn't anything wrong with being a Groyper if that's what someone actually chooses to be. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I don't disavow Groypers. In fact, I support Groypers. Am I personally a Groyper? I am not, but that doesn't mean that I have to purge and ostracize people purely because they identify as something that I am not within the conservative movement, especially when the overwhelming majority of the Groypers I've met are patriots. My goal in politics is to build coalitions and build a winning Republican Party. Matt appears to be operating from the Ben Shapiro school of politics, where if somebody disagrees with you on 5% of the issues, they're immediately treated as an enemy of the state who needs to be purged from the conservative movement. And that's not how I view politics. That's how I think you win elections. And I think that the proof is in the pudding. And I want to build lasting coalitions. Doesn't seem like Matt wants to, though. Now, all that being said, the problem for Matt in posting something like this is that I know Philip personally, and I know exactly what happened between Philip and Matt. You see, the moment Philip walked into the studio wearing a Pepe shirt, Matt immediately honed in on Philip and asked Philip whether he was a Groyper or not. Now, before we go any further, it's worth explaining something for people like Matt who aren't terminally online or have absolutely no understanding what space they're walking into. While Pepe has become associated with the Groyper movement in recent years, Pepe existed long before Groypers. In fact, Pepe is one of the oldest memes in the history of the internet. Sad Pepe was circulating online as far back as 2013, possibly even earlier. The character originally came from a comic strip and eventually evolved into one of the internet's most widely used memes. For years, Pepe wasn't political at all. It was used on forums, social media, image boards, Twitch chats, and pretty much every corner of the internet. People created thousands of versions of Sad Pepe. Some were funny, some were wholesome, some were sad. And yes, some were completely political, while other ones were apolitical. Now, that said, the political messaging associated with Pepe didn't really emerge until the 2015-2016 presidential election cycle, when Hillary Clinton's campaign, along with the ADL and several other media outlets, decided to elevate claims that Pepe had become a far-right symbol. That's when Pepe became heavily politicized. Before that, it was simply a meme. And even today, plenty of people still view it that way. Not everyone wearing a Pepe shirt is a Groyper, and not everyone posting Pepe memes is making a political statement. But Matt couldn't help himself. He saw the shirt, immediately assumed Philip was a Groyper, and then took that assumption to the internet. The problem is that Matt already knew better, because Philip told him directly in person at the studio that he wasn't a Groyper. Needless to say, when I saw Matt's tweet, I reached out to Philip almost immediately. I asked Philip, Matt is claiming on X that you're a Groyper. I was under the impression that you told him you weren't a Groyper when he asked you at Jubilee. Did that conversation actually happen? And Philip responded saying, no, I specifically told him I'm not a Groyper, but he's certainly free to be pathetic and spread a load of bullshit if that's what he wants to do with his time. And that's really the issue here. Why lie, Matt? Why misrepresent someone you literally just met? Why knowingly label somebody as something they explicitly told you they aren't? What exactly is the purpose? Is it engagement? Is it clout? Is it an attempt to score points against Nick Fuentes' audience? What is the function of posting falsities like this? Because all Matt is accomplishing is establishing a pattern. He keeps showing people that he's willing to misrepresent others if he thinks it will earn him engagement, score him an own on the internet, or help him farm attention from people who already dislike Groypers. And that pattern becomes even more obvious when you look at what he posted next. Because, hey folks, guess what? Matt wasn't done. See, shortly after that, Matt quote tweeted a post about Sneeko, where Sneeko claimed that Catholicism spread through forced conversions while Islam spread through knowledge, which is just a thoroughly dishonest and ahistorical understanding of both religions. Islam has spread through conquest and military expansion for much of its history. In fact, there are numerous examples throughout history where Islamic empires expanded by the sword. Meanwhile, Christianity has certainly been involved in wars throughout its 2,000-year history, and there have absolutely been instances where Christians failed to live up to Christian principles, but the claim that Christianity spread solely through forced conversions while Islam spread peacefully through knowledge is simply not supported by history. It's a cartoonishly simplistic understanding of both faiths. Now, Matt saw this post about Sneeko and immediately jumped on the opportunity, quote tweeting it and writing, "This was one of Nick Fuentes' best buddies, by the way. These people are total jokes. They have no respect for Christianity." Now, what's interesting about this isn't even the attack on Sneeko. What's interesting is a sudden attempt to position himself as a defender of Christianity. Because, folks, look, I'm Catholic. I don't hide it. I've spoken openly about my faith many times, but what struck me as strange about Matt's tweet is that it came literally hours after a conversation Matt and I had in person. See, after the Jubilee debate we did this weekend, a group of us ended up going to a coffee shop together. We were discussing religion, Protestantism, Mormonism, Catholicism, and different faith traditions. During that conversation, I asked Matt about his own beliefs, and Matt openly told me that he is not Christian. I don't remember his exact wording, but it was something to the effect that he's still trying to figure things out. He said he wasn't Christian and was still searching. Now, for the record, I don't hold that against him. Everybody is on their own journey, their own faith journey. Everybody arrives at faith differently. In fact, when he told me that, my response was simple. I said, the Catholic Church will always welcome you. If you're searching for truth, the door will always be open, brother. Now, what I found strange wasn't that Matt isn't Christian. What I found strange was watching someone tell me in person that they aren't Christian and then turn around on the internet just a few hours later and suddenly adopt the role of Christianity's online defender so he could score points against Nick Fuentes and Sneeko. Again, maybe that's all genuine from Matt. Maybe he's sincerely concerned about Christianity. If so, great. I genuinely appreciate anybody standing up for Christians in a culture that increasingly treats Christianity with hostility. But the timing is very strange. It felt less like a sincere defense of Christianity and more like an opportunity, another opportunity for Matt to attack people that he doesn't like and wants to farm for content. And look, I'll be honest, I'd rather see Matt accept Christ into his heart than spend all day on X defending Christians against internet Muslims or pretend Muslims like Sneeko. We appreciate the support. Trust me, Christians appreciate it. We love the love. Don't get me wrong. Christianity has survived for thousands of years. There are billions of Christians around the world. We'll be okay without Matt Nuclear's defense. Trust me. But if you're genuinely concerned about Christianity, I'd much rather see you join the team than simply use Christianity as a rhetorical weapon against people you already argue with online just so you can score online points or gain an audience from it. Now, regardless, this tweet wasn't really about Christianity. It was about Nick Fuentes when you think about it. Just like the Philip tweet was about Groypers, just like so many of Matt's posts seem to circle back to the exact same people over and over again. Because as we continue moving through Matt's timeline, a very obvious pattern starts to emerge. He isn't simply criticizing arguments. He appears to have made it his mission to wage a one-man crusade against an entire segment of the America First movement, against the conservative movement. And nowhere was that more obvious than when Matt decided to weigh in on JD Vance. See, for context, over the last week or so, one of the most interesting developments on the right has been watching a lot of these Israel First commentators, these neocons, suddenly turn on JD Vance. The reason, of course, is that JD Vance had the audacity to support pursuing a peace agreement with Iran and to offer what I would consider a very reasonable criticism of certain actions and decisions made by the Israeli government and their officials. Apparently, for some folks out there, some Israel Firsters, criticizing the government of Israel is now grounds for suspicion. And Matt decided to throw his hat into the ring with what I can only describe as an absolutely brilliant take. And I say that sarcastically, okay? Very sarcastically. Matt wrote, JD Vance seems weak and insidious. It's almost like he's waiting for Trump's term to end before he says what he really thinks about the Israel situation. No, just tell us now. Now, maybe Matt wants to clarify exactly what he means by that, because to me, there seems to be a pretty obvious implication buried in Matt's statement. The implication appears to be that JD Vance secretly harbors some kind of extreme anti-Israel or anti-Jewish sentiment and is merely hiding it until the political timing is right for him. At least, that's how many people appear to be interpreting this, including myself. And if that is the implication, then it's an absolutely ridiculous one. Criticizing the government of Israel is not anti-Semitism. Criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu is not anti-Semitism. Criticizing military actions taken by the Israeli government is not anti-Semitism. Questioning whether the United States should be dragged into endless foreign conflicts is not anti-Semitism. Questioning whether American taxpayers should continue funding foreign governments like Israel while Americans struggle at home is not anti-Semitism. These are political questions. These are policy questions. These are the kinds of debates Americans are supposed to be allowed to have in a free society. Yet every single time somebody raises concerns about American foreign policy in the Middle East, there's an effort from folks like Matt, certain corners of the political establishment, to immediately imply that something darker is going on beneath the surface. And that's what I find so strange about Matt's post. JD Vance isn't exactly some fringe figure. He's literally the sitting vice president of the United States. He's one of the most influential figures in the Republican Party. And his position on these issues is increasingly becoming the mainstream position among Republicans, particularly younger Republicans. More and more Americans are asking why the United States seems incapable of having an honest conversation about foreign policy relating to Israel without somebody immediately accusing them of anti-Semitism. More and more Americans are questioning why criticism of virtually every government on earth is considered fair game except one. More and more Americans are asking why advocating for peace in the Middle East is somehow controversial, while advocating for military escalation on behalf of Israel is treated as though it's some kind of responsible position. And frankly, when you look at some of the rhetoric coming directly from members of the Israeli government themselves, it becomes pretty easy to understand why people have concerns. We've talked about this over the past week. We've seen statements from Israeli officials that would be considered completely unacceptable if they came from almost any other government on earth. Just this past week, we saw Ben-Gvir calling for Israel to essentially go berserk on Lebanon. He's basically calling for a genocide. We've seen years of this sort of inflammatory rhetoric, escalating military actions, and statements from elected officials that have alarmed people not just on the right, but people across the entire political spectrum. So when JD Vance says, maybe we should pursue peace instead of endless war. Maybe we should prioritize American interests. Maybe we should avoid another generational conflict in the Middle East. The response from people like Matt seems to be suspicion rather than agreement. Why? Why is peace the controversial position all of a sudden? Why is avoiding war the controversial position? Why is putting American interests first ahead of any other foreign nation suddenly evidence of some hidden agenda? These are questions that people like Matt don't seem interested in responding to at all. Instead, he reverts to a tactic that most of these Israel firsters revert to, which is to throw out vague accusations, vague implications, and then lets his audience fill in the blanks. And honestly, I hope the paycheck is worth it. As I told Matt in person at the coffee shop, at least he can now say he's collecting a $7,000 check from the Daily Wire. Good for him. But I hope he's getting paid a whole hell of a lot more than just $7,000 if he's going to spend his days running interference for the Israeli government, smearing people, Americans, red-blooded Americans who disagree with him, and trying to turn every criticism of Israel into some kind of moral scandal. $7,000 doesn't seem nearly enough compensation for having to look at yourself in the mirror every single morning while attacking Americans for defending America. But look, Matt wasn't finished. He's never finished. In fact, almost immediately after that, he went right back to what has become his favorite hobby on the internet, obsessing over Groypers. And this next example is important because it reveals something much bigger than just another Twitter argument. It reveals what appears to be Matt's entire strategy, and it raises a very simple question. Is the goal here actually to build a winning conservative movement, or is the goal simply to purge anyone who refuses to fall in line with unconditional support for Israel? Because immediately after the JD Vance post, Matt went right back to what has become a reoccurring theme in his timeline. Groypers, 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 Nick Fuentes, Nick Fuentes, Nick Fuentes, and anyone remotely associated with America First. At this point, it's honestly starting to feel less like political commentary and more like an obsession. This guy cannot seem to go more than a few posts without bringing up Nick Fuentes or Groypers in some kind of way. It's almost as if he has built an entire content strategy around farming engagement from people he doesn't like. And this clip that he shared here is a great example. It's a clip of Nick Matau debating somebody who Matt once again attempted to frame through the lens of being a Groyper. Now, from what I could tell, this particular individual actually does identify as a Groyper. Whether he is or isn't, honestly, doesn't really matter to me because that's not the actual point. The point is that Matt seems completely fixated on sorting people into ideological categories and then attacking them based on those labels rather than addressing the larger questions facing the conservative movement. Every issue somehow gets reduced to whether somebody is a Groyper, whether somebody is associated with Nick Fuentes, whether somebody is sufficiently loyal to a particular faction in the conservative movement, and it's honestly exhausting to watch. And what I find especially strange is that all of these folks are supposedly on the same side of the political spectrum. We're talking about conservatives, Republicans, America First voters, young right-wing activists, and people who broadly agree on the overwhelming majority of issues. Yet Matt appears far more interested in fighting people inside the conservative movement than fighting the people who are actually trying to defeat conservatives electorally. We're talking about the left, the woke left, the Marxists. Matt wants none of that smoke from the left. No. See, if Matt were truly a conservative, and I have my own doubts about that, which we'll get to in a minute, then wouldn't the logical goal be to build a coalition? Wouldn't the logical goal be bringing people together around the 80, 90, or even 95% of issues where they agree rather than endlessly focusing on the handful of disagreements that exist between different factions? Because is that how you don't win elections? By treating huge portions of your own coalition as enemies. You win by building the largest coalition possible around shared goals and shared priorities. And that's the part that genuinely confuses me. Does Matt actually want Republicans to win? Does he want conservatives to build a durable coalition capable of winning elections for years to come? Or is the goal simply to win arguments on the internet? Because those are not the same thing. In fact, they're often directly opposed to one another. The reality is that public opinion on Israel has shifted dramatically over the last few years, especially among younger Republicans, as I mentioned a moment ago. And this isn't speculation. This isn't some fringe observation. This is reflected in polling. American support for Israel is lower today than it has been at almost any point in recent memory. Among younger Republicans, support has fallen even more dramatically. A majority of younger Republicans now express skepticism toward Israel or outright oppose current Israeli policy. Even across the broader Republican electorate, the number of people questioning the relationship has increased substantially. Positions that were once considered fringe inside the Republican Party are rapidly becoming mainstream. Whether Ben Shapiro likes that reality or not doesn't change any of this. Whether the Daily Wire likes this or they don't, it won't change any of these facts. So when Matt spends his time trying to isolate, attack, and purge large segments of the America First movement, I genuinely wonder what the long-term strategy is supposed to be. Is the goal to convince people to come to our side? Because constantly insulting them doesn't seem like a very effective persuasion strategy. Is the goal to grow a coalition? Because constantly labeling people extremists, racists, anti-Semites, or whatever term happens to be convenient that week doesn't exactly encourage unity. Or is the goal simply to create an ideologically purified movement that gets smaller and smaller while feeling morally superior? Because look, if that's the goal, congratulations. That's a fantastic way to lose elections. And that's what makes this whole thing so frustrating to watch. We're living through a moment where millions of Americans are questioning foreign intervention. We're questioning endless wars. We're questioning foreign aid. We're questioning the priorities of the political establishment and asking whether America should start putting its own interests and people first again. And instead of engaging with those concerns, Matt seems determined to spend his time attacking the people raising them. He seems far more interested in policing the movement than actually growing it. And look, if you've been around for the last decade and a half, all of this sounds unbelievably familiar. Now, all that being said, if you think Matt's obsession stops there, it doesn't, because shortly afterward, he posted yet another clip featuring Nick Fuentes. And this one might actually be the strangest example yet. Matt shared a clip with the caption, "Nick Fuentes just got humiliated on his stream for being Italian and not considered quote-unquote white." He then immediately pivots, "But what about the Jews, bro? So sad." Now, I have to be honest, folks. When I saw this post, my first reaction was, why are you conducting whiteness tests on white people? Why are you even having this conversation? Why is this something that supposedly an anti-woke black conservative would spend his time obsessing over? Somebody's whiteness. Because let's be honest about what's actually happening here, folks. Matt is mocking Nick over a conversation involving racial identity, whiteness, ethnicity, and who qualifies as what racial category. Matt's effectively inserting himself into an argument about who is and isn't white, and then using that argument as content. And the irony is that this is supposedly coming from somebody who says he's on the same side of the political spectrum, that's constantly criticizing the left for racializing every argument. Ben Shapiro spent over a decade arguing that identity politics is bad. More broadly, culturally, we're constantly told that people should be judged based on their character rather than their race. We're constantly told that obsessing over racial categories is destructive and divisive. Ben Shapiro has said that a whole lot. Yet here is Matt, Ben Shapiro's most recent hire on the Daily Wire, voluntarily amplifying and participating in a conversation that is entirely centered around race and identity and purity tests, racial purity tests. And that's what I find so bizarre. One of the most common criticisms establishment conservatives make about the dissident right, the America First movement, and Groypers is that they're supposedly obsessed with identity politics, but through an inverted lens of the left, right? We're told that the dissident right is too focused on race. We're told they're too focused on demographics. We're told they're too focused on ethnicity. But then you see somebody who is hired by the Daily Wire, by Ben Shapiro, sharing clips about who's white and who's not white, whether Italians count as white, whether Jews count as white. And suddenly all of those principles that Ben has been advocating for years seem to go out the window. Apparently, identity politics is only bad when the left does it, at least for the Daily Wire. And that's what's unbelievably funny about this whole situation to me, because one of Ben Shapiro's most viral debate moments involves this exact topic. If you've watched the Jubilee debate between Ben Shapiro and Naima, you'll remember the exchange where Naima repeatedly refers to Ben as white, and Ben repeatedly pushes back, arguing that because he's Jewish, he does not view himself as white in the way she's describing. Now, whether you agree with Ben or disagree with Ben, that's not really the point. The point is that conversations about Jewish identity, ethnicity, race, and whiteness are not exactly rare. They're not exactly unique to Nick Fuentes, the Groypers, or the America First movement. These conversations have happened all the time, and they will continue to happen. Yet when somebody Matt dislikes becomes involved in one of those conversations, suddenly it's treated as proof that they're ridiculous or unserious or racist or anti-Semitic. Now, what makes this especially strange is that Matt appears to be doing the very thing his side constantly claims to oppose. And by his side, I mean the neocons, the Israel First neocons, right? He is actively participating in racializing political discourse. He is, in fact, amplifying racial discussions. He is turning racial identity into content. He is sharing clips centered around race, ethnicity, racial purity, so he can score points against people he dislikes. And again, I have to ask, what is the goal here? Is the goal to persuade people? Is the goal to build a movement? Is the goal to win elections? Because spending your time arguing about who is and isn't white seems like a bizarre use of energy for someone who supposedly wants to advance conservative politics. And look, the more I look at Matt's posts, the more I noticed the same pattern repeating itself. Everything somehow circles back to the same themes. Groypers, Nick Fuentes, Israel, AIPAC, identity, internal fights on the right. The people he spends the most time attacking are almost never leftists. They're never Democrats or the political establishment. They're people who are already somewhere within the broader right-wing coalition. And at a certain point, you start wondering why. Why are Matt and the Daily Wire spending so much energy inward? Why is so much effort being spent attacking people who largely agree with you on most issues? Why does every conversation seem to end back at the exact same set of enemies? And that's what ultimately led me to dig a little deeper into Matt's background, because after seeing all of these posts, after watching the pattern repeat itself over and over again, I remembered a clip from a debate Matt did with Amanda Seales a few months ago. And once you hear what Matt actually admits in the clip, well, I think you'll start understanding why everything is happening the way that it is.
Remember,
Where are you from?
Where am I from? What do you mean by that? Like, what state am I from? Where was I born?
Where do you live right now?
I live in Florida. I was born in Angola, though. I was born in sub-Saharan Africa, okay?
Interesting. So Ben Shapiro hired a foreign-born African to defend foreign influence in American politics. You genuinely can't make this up. These jokes practically write themselves. Think about it for a second, folks. Ben Shapiro is apparently so desperate to turn the narrative on behalf of Israel in America that he literally reached into Jubilee's debate bench, pulled out one of the few foreign-born debaters, and elevated him into a Daily Wire personality so he could serve as a token conservative whose primary job is fighting Groypers on Ben Shapiro's behalf. Because let's be honest, Ben Shapiro is never going to debate Nick Fuentes himself. He's not going to get into that arena. He's not going to put himself in a position where he has to defend a lot of these arguments directly himself. So instead, he hired somebody else to do it for him. And that's really what appears to be happening here. Matt Nuclear wasn't hired because he's some uniquely insightful political commentator. He wasn't hired because he's breaking groundbreaking stories. He wasn't hired because he's bringing some revolutionary new perspective to conservative media. Matt Nuclear was hired to do exactly what he's doing right now. Be Ben Shapiro's attack dog. Ben wanted somebody whose job would be to spend every day fighting Groypers, fighting the America First movement, and running interference whenever criticism of Israel, of foreign influence in our elections, or foreign money starts gaining traction on the right. The funny part is that Matt has effectively signed on the dotted line to be humiliated, ridiculed, ratioed, and clowned on by Groypers every single day for the rest of his existence on the internet. That's his job. That's what he appears to have been hired to do, to be a lolcow. And unfortunately for Matt, he's not particularly good at any of this, because the reality is that many of his positions are either dishonest, self-contradictory, or impossible to defend under scrutiny. This is a guy who has spent his time defending Miriam Edelson's enormous influence in American politics. This is a guy who has spent his time defending foreign influence in American government and American elections. This is a guy who has effectively been telling Americans that they should simply shut up and accept foreign influence in our politics. Just accept foreign nationals, foreign interests, and foreign money are going to have enormous influence over the American political system. Don't question it. Don't criticize it. Don't push back on it. Just accept it. And that's where the irony becomes impossible to ignore. You have a foreign-born political commentator lecturing Americans about why they should tolerate foreign influence in American politics. You have a foreign-born commentator arguing that foreigners having enormous influence over American elections is perfectly normal and perfectly acceptable. Whether you agree with him or not, you have to admit the optics are absolutely atrocious, incredibly atrocious. You couldn't script it any better if you tried it. So, hey, good job, Ben Shapiro. Really? Out of everyone available, you hired a foreign-born commentator, not only to defend foreign influence, but also to spend his time stoking racial and factional divisions on the right. And that's another irony I just can't get over, really. Ben Shapiro spent years criticizing identity politics. He spent years criticizing intersectionality. He spent years arguing that Americans should stop viewing everything through the lens of race and group identity. That was one of his favorite talking points, yet now we're watching one of his newest hires spend his time amplifying conversations about race, arguing over who's white and who's not white, obsessing over identity categories, and engaging in exactly the kind of politics that the Daily Wire spent years claiming to oppose. The same people who spent years lecturing everyone else about identity politics are now effectively participating in it when it's politically convenient for them to use it so they can defend Israel. And look, honestly, it genuinely feels like a group of executives sat around a boardroom table asking themselves, how do we save the Daily Wire? And somebody just responded saying, hey, I know, let's hire one of the guys who creates contradictions with everything we spent years saying. Let's hire a foreign-born commentator to defend foreign influence. Let's hire somebody to conduct purity tests inside the conservative movement while claiming to oppose purity tests. Let's hire somebody to engage in identity-based arguments while claiming to oppose identity politics. Let's hire somebody whose primary contribution is attacking large portions of the grassroots base that increasingly disagrees with us. Truly, genius work. Absolutely incredible strategy. If the goal was to create content that constantly highlights the contradictions within establishment conservatism, then congratulations. Mission accomplished. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. I hope you have a terrific day. Peace.